Morning, everybody. This is our CBT 101 session. I'm Dan Molesky. I'm the CBT coordinator here at the Mohawk Regional Information Center. A couple of housekeeping items. So if you do have any questions, I'm going to ask if you can hold those until the end of the presentation, unless it's something really urgent that we really need to talk about right on that slide. I've left a lot of time for questions here. This is a very broad, diverse topic with a lot of potential issues to talk through. But really, I wanted to focus today especially on the basics of computer-based testing. So we'll jump in. Only other point I will bring up too, this session is being recorded and it will be shared sometime in the next couple of days on the MORIC website. So if you or your colleagues need to review the materials later on, it'll be available. So the purpose of our session today is really to talk about the basics of computer-based testing for 3 through 8 ELA and Mathematics, looking at some of the systems, some of the processes, some of the milestones. There's a couple timelines that look just a little different from paper-based testing. So to try and give folks who have not done computer-based testing in the past that baseline information on how testing works is really kind of the purpose of what we're talking about today. So hopefully that applies to you. So for our agenda today, we're going to look at a little bit of a timeline of how CBT is being rolled out across the state over the next 3 to 5 years. An overview of the Questar testing platform. So Questar is a term that you'll hear quite a bit when we're talking about computer-based testing. It's sort of a vendor name, sort of a system name. So some of those systems and terminology around how computer-based testing works. What does a year of CBT look like? Some options for you and your building or district to get started, some support information, and then again, we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. So, rollout timeline. So I believe most people will probably be aware of this, but SED has announced a 3-year timeline over which most of the state testing that occurs is going to be moved from primarily paper to primarily computer-based in the next 3 years. So this year, primarily nothing has really changed. Next year is when a large change is going to happen. So grades 5 and 8 are going to be testing on computer for 3 through 8 ELA math, and science exams are also going to computer that year as well. We won't really have a lot of information on the CBT science exams for you today. SED hasn't really given us a lot of information yet on those. We know that's a very important topic to talk through, and we'll be sure to gather that information and bring that back to you once we've got it. Next year as well, obviously NYSED and NYSED are going to be moving to computer as well. Again, not a lot of discussion really that we can bring to you today on that. And so SED is really going with this sort of phased approach over the next 3 years with the timeline. So next year, grades 5 and 8 are going to be moving to computer for ELA, math, and science. Following that, the following year, grades 4 and 6 are going to be moving. In addition to, obviously, grades 5 and 8 are going to remain, and then the final grades are going to move in the spring of 26, so that really all grades are going to be on computer-based testing. Now, of course, when I say all grades and all students, there are the usual exceptions for students who need to test on paper based on having an IEP or a testing accommodation that's requiring those sorts of adjustments. So if I do say all at any point, just be aware that not every single student in a building is going to obviously be testing on computer. There are going to be exceptions, but. So overview of some of the Questar testing platforms. So there's just a lot of systems that if you haven't tested on computer before, you might not have encountered. Some of these, obviously are common for everybody, the online request system, for instance, and we'll go through each of these as we talk, but it's good to get a baseline understanding of what some of these systems are. Some of them may actually not apply for your district as well. They may be things that you don't need to encounter or utilize based on how you're testing or how you're scoring. So it's good to talk through some of these pieces so you know what we're talking about and potentially what you might not need to pay much attention to. So the online request system is probably a system most or all building principals have encountered before. So this is where you're actually going in. Really right now this system is open to make your testing requests. You're going to identify obviously which grade levels, which subjects you're going to be testing on paper or on computer. There's a screenshot here of a portion of the system where you're identifying the lead scoring entity, which is especially important and confusing in a lot of cases because when you elect to test a grade level in a subject on computer, you're also telling SED how is that exam going to be scored. And there's several options. They're listed here on the screen. So you'll need to know really before the due date, which is December 9th, is when you need to have all this information filled out and completed. You'll need to know how you're doing scoring for your exams. Hopefully that won't be too much of a difficulty, but Generally, again, the options are, scoring in district or in school. There are certain restrictions around that. Districts have to be of a certain size to score internally. If you're doing BOCES regional scoring, or if you're working through a scoring vendor. I will say the vast majority of districts in our region, as far as I'm aware, are going to have one of the last two options. There are some that can do district scoring, but if you're doing a scoring vendor and you're purchasing that service through the MORIC, you will want to pick OSC scoring in that pull down. We've had some confusion in the past. There is a Questar option under the scoring entity, which is very confusing because, as I said before, Questar is a system that's related to computer-based testing, so that seems like it might be an option. It's an oddity that there's a scoring vendor that at least was doing scoring under the name Questar as well as Questar. Yes. All right, we're back. So I'll zoom through this slide one more time. I'm not sure where we had the break there, and I apologize for the tech difficulties. Online request system, you're ordering paper tests, you're ordering computer-based testing, you're identifying a lead scoring entity. Really what I would want to leave you with here is if you're picking scoring vendor, don't pick Questar, you're probably picking OSC scoring. If you're in here and you're not quite sure what your configuration is, you need a little bit of guidance from us, just give me a call, give Data Readiness a call. We can help you out with making these decisions. And again, December 9th is really the due date for this information to be in. So just keep that in mind as you're planning. This is really your first milestone in terms of planning for testing. Are you doing computer-based testing or paper-based testing? This is kind of where that first decision really has to be made and registered with SED. So Nextera Admin. So this is the web-based administration system where you would actually be managing the information around setting up for computer-based testing. So you think about things like putting together rosters, making sure that all of your students are in the system, printing out login tickets. So you or your staff are going to be in this system fairly often during testing. It's part of the setup for testing, the monitoring of testing, setting not tested codes is done in here as well. So a lot of the work of computer-based testing really happens inside of Nextera Admin. And for those of you who aren't sure if you're going to be doing computer-based testing this year, or that you're going to be staying paper-based for this year, maybe you're going to be doing computer-based next year, Nextera Admin is actually important for really all buildings and districts across the state this year because scoring CDs that were previously distributed by SED, they're not sending those out anymore this year. Instead, you're going to go into Nextera Admin and you would find the scoring materials within that actual system instead of receiving those scoring CDs. So you should have received a welcome to Nextera Admin email in the past couple of weeks or maybe even 3 or 4 weeks ago. So if you have that email, or if maybe you deleted it, you might want to go into your junk mail and pull that out. You'll definitely want to log into this system, even if you know computer-based testing isn't something you're doing this year. This is also a system that paper-based testing buildings and districts are going to be using as well. We're not really going to go into the specifics of Nextera Admin in this training. It's a very important system, and there's a lot of things in there that you'll need to know. But just know for now, this is a system that you'll hear more about as you're thinking about computer-based testing. ScorePoint. So very simply, ScorePoint is for districts or BOCES. If you're doing regional scoring or district scoring, this is where the actual scoring of student assessments happens. This is, again, a separate training itself. I would say if you're doing OSC scoring or vendor scoring of some sort, you don't really need to know about ScorePoint at all. You can essentially ignore it because all of your scoring is being done by somebody else, essentially. So the Nextera Test Delivery System. So this is also called the secure browser or the Questar secure browser. This is the actual program that is installed on your student's machine. This is what they're going to open up when they go to testing, when you do the simulation, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. So there's a setup and instruction guide, also called the SIG in some cases. So there's a whole instruction guide that SED has on their website about how to set up this browser on a particular platform. Chromebook obviously is very popular in our region. There's a lot of good information in the SIG about how to install and set this up. This is another timeline item as well. So SED regularly will provide updates for this piece of software. Usually what we do is we recommend waiting a little bit longer into the year before you go in and install this program on any machine that you're planning on doing computer-based testing on, because SED may release an update to the software and then you'd have to potentially go through and install all of those updates as well. This can be downloaded through the Nextera Admin system. So we'll provide more information through our usual delivery methods, Tuesday tidbits and direct emails to people as we get the information from SED that this browser is finalized, that it's got its final update done, and then you'll know you're able to go in and install it. Again, dependent on whether or not you're doing computer-based testing and who you're doing it with. Practice tests. This is a fantastic way to do, practice testing of your students. So this uses that secure browser that we just talked about, so you can actually have students sit down with their Chromebooks in classrooms. It's not identical to the actual testing process, but it gives some of the same feel of it. So there are sample logins that you can print out and distribute to students the same as you would for computer-based testing. And essentially, you can also generate test logins that have accommodations as well. So if you have students that you want to make sure that that process is also in place, that you can see what the accommodations would look like for them, that can be done with sample logins as well. So this is another tool that you can use as part of your arsenal of getting students ready for testing. Obviously, no stakes in this case. This is not being distributed. This is not going anywhere to SED or being recorded anywhere. And related to that, so the question sampler is another excellent resource that you can use. So this is a website. This is not based on the installation of a program. Students and teachers can go to this website. You can pull up several practice tests for each of the grade levels, and it has pretty much an identical interface to what your students will see inside of the secure browser. It has text-to-speech. It has a number of samplers for each of the grade levels. You can test out constructive response as well. You can even use it with empty constructed response and math equation editors. So if your teachers want to bring their own materials and use an interface that they're going to see during spring testing, that's also an option as well. So recommended to use the Chrome browser for that as well, but definitely a fantastic starting point. If you're starting from ground zero with computer-based testing, the question sampler is really a good place that you can start getting a handle on what does this look like for students when they get to testing. So what does a year of computer-based testing look like? So I've put together a timeline with as much information as we have at the moment. What you'll find is some of these dates will come out as the year progresses. So I've put what information I have in here, and knowing what's happened in the past, we'll just sort of look through what computer-based testing looks like. So really the process starts in December. That online request system we talked about closes December 9th. So at the same time, simulation data is due to level 2. So what that means is Nextera Admin is going to be preloaded with your student information, segmented by grade level, and SED is going to pull that information for the CBT simulation, which we'll talk about in a second. They're going to pull that on December 9th as well. So if you've decided that you're going to be doing computer-based testing this year, live operational computer-based testing as we usually call it, you're also going to want to make sure in level 0 that your demographic and enrollment data is locked around that same window of December 9th. And we'll send out reminders on that. We'll make sure to reach out to districts, make sure that they know that that's supposed to happen. But that's going to save you work later on so that you don't have to do as much data entry of an entire grade level of students or something like that. There's obviously always going to be some entry after December 9th if a student arrives. You're still probably going to have to put them into Nextera Admin, but at least you can lessen the load there. Next step in December, so tech readiness. SED asks that each district that's doing operational computer-based testing does a technology readiness assessment, just confirming that you have devices and hardware and things in place in district so that you're ready to go. Certainly, that's mostly a checklist, and you can find that through the Nextera Admin site. It's due pretty much at the end of the year. Moving into January, so at some point, and we don't have a date for this yet, SED will take that data that was submitted to them on December 9th, and they'll load all of that information for you into the Nextera Admin system to get you ready for the CBT simulation. We're hoping that that's going to happen maybe sooner, maybe late December or even mid-December. It could happen in January as well. But at some point, SED will load that data in and open up the system so you can actually start modifying your data. So let's talk about the CBT simulation. So this is one of SED's tools to make sure that their systems are ready to go and to make sure that the district and building systems are ready to go as well. So it's a live simulation of computer-based testing. Pretty much every step of the process looks like operational live testing. You would be printing individualized student login tickets for each of your students. Your staff would be administering an abbreviated test. It's not going to be a full 2-day test, anything like that. There's a shorter set of questions. And this is available for any operational grades that you're testing. So if in your building or district you've decided to test grades 4 and 7 on computer this year, live, the simulation is going to be available for your grades 4 and 7 students. The actual full simulation is not available for any building or any grade level that's not planning on doing operational testing. SED has been asked about this, and they've pretty much confirmed that if you want to do the full simulation with individualized login tickets, that's pretty much the only way to do it. There are, as we've talked about, other ways to have your students get comfortable and your teachers get comfortable with the process of computer-based testing. Those practice logins and the question sampler are great tools for that. But the simulation is really only available if you're going the full way. And the simulation is going to be happening from January 17th to the 27th. That's generally a one-day affair for whatever grade levels are going to be doing the simulation. So moving forward in the calendar, and again, things get a little fuzzier here. We have a lot of TBDs moving forward. So in April, my best guess, SED will be completing another load of that data that you would lock from level 0. So really, actually, the timeline probably would also include, at some point, we'll remind you, maybe in March, that you might want to lock and load your demo and enrollment data in level 0 in anticipation of SED taking that data, moving it into Nextera Admin for the ELA and Math administration. We know that ELA is going to be happening from April 19th to the 28th, and then scoring happens soon after that. And then following that, fairly soon after, Math is going to be operational and have scoring as well. So that's at least that section of the calendar. There are certainly some potential for some additional calendar items to happen in there as well. I will also say in past years, SED had a separate load of student data both for ELA and Math. So districts that participated at least in the previous year, they actually had a simulation data load happen, they had an ELA data load happen, and a Math data load happen, which unfortunately also meant having to reconfigure Nextera Admin each time with testing accommodation information, classroom configurations, and things like that. The RICs are working with SED. We're trying to encourage them to not wipe out the data so many times and to lessen the load of setting up the system on you all, of course. So we'll give you some more updates. My hope is that because ELA and Math are so close together in the calendar this year, that's an indication that there will only be a single load of data to Nextera Admin, that first item in April. But we will see and certainly provide updates as that happens. Moving on to June, so the CBT and paper-based testing field tests are going to happen sometime in May or June. Again, that information hasn't been released by SED yet. So this is another avenue to do a lead up to computer-based testing. The standalone field test, basically SED kicks the tires on future versions of the test, and they basically, districts in that online request system all the way back in December, you're going to elect to either do computer-based or paper-based field testing for your building. And that's going to tell them how you're going to be administering that in June. And we'll talk about that a little later on when we get to some of the options for getting rid of computer-based testing. So some touch points throughout here that might be familiar to you with paper-based testing, but just some different pieces to the process, obviously. Far more involved with technology as well, of course, given how the testing process works. But this is sort of a snapshot of some of the dates and milestones you might expect for computer-based testing. The testing schedule is posted on NYSED's website as well. I just wanted to throw out that reminder as well that they have other tests listed there, of course. We have grade 8 science as well being given on on paper this year. Science is still on paper. So, options to get started. So I wanted to provide everybody with the baseline of the systems and the milestones, how do things look. This is kind of the thought process of how you can approach computer-based testing when your students might first test on a computer. So the first option is going operational testing this year. I've spoken with several districts. I don't know that a lot of people are going from 0 computer-based testing to everybody, all grades 3 through 8, all subjects being tested. I would recommend, if you're considering it, think about picking a few grades and subjects this year. Computer-based testing, you can start with as few as 1 grade level in 1 subject. So if grade 5 and ELA is the right configuration for you this year, that might be a good place to start. One thing that even more buildings have really been thinking about this year that I've seen happen is grades 4 and 7 are a pretty good group to start with this year, because those are the students who are definitely going to be taking computer-based testing next year. So starting with them this year sort of creates a nice flow of they're going to test on computer this year because next year we know they're going to be testing on computer. But really, whatever grade levels, whatever subjects, that's entirely up to you. And again, that would be done through the online request system. So option 2, if you're not quite ready for operational testing, and really you can do field testing and option 1. These are not exclusive, but just thinking through maybe different configurations of things. But if you're not thinking that operational is really something you'd like to go with this year, I would strongly recommend when you do your standalone field testing registration in the online request system this year, I would definitely recommend going with computer-based testing. Again, very low stakes, really no stakes. The only downside or thing to consider with field testing is you don't get to pick a grade level or a subject. So you're basically just saying, SED, we're going to do computer-based testing, but SED gets to pick the grade level and the subject. So if you're concerned about certain grade levels or certain subjects' readiness for computer-based testing, field testing isn't really going to let you zero in on them in an official capacity. Of course, you can use the question sampler and things like that to get staff and students ready, but this in particular isn't going to let you pick a grade level or a subject. And the third option is really you can do neither. You can choose to not have any computer-based testing this year. Next year, grades 5 and 8 are going to be testing on computer for all 3 subjects for ELA, math, and science. And again, we don't really have any details yet on science. Obviously, the format of the science test is also changing as well, so there's a lot of upheaval happening there. And we'll certainly be sharing information as we get it, but this is certainly an option. Nobody's required to do computer-based testing this year, at least for 3-8 ELA and math. But that would be your first experience. Next year would be grades 5 and 8. So I did want to take another look at the timeline here because I think there is a point about testing that maybe can get missed a little bit as if we just focus on the top part of that timeline, that computer-based testing timeline. By the way, I have a link to this resource in the presentation. This presentation will be shared out pretty soon after we're done here. But I also wanted to point out that in addition to computer-based testing, we're also seeing, as often happens, a fairly big shift in the learning standards and some of the structure of some of the tests as well. And I can't speak as much to learning standards, but certainly the test structure I can focus on as well. So there is a change happening this year in the spring of 2023. The grades 3-8 ELA and math tests, the standards and the structure of those tests are shifting as well. And I'll just pull up a quick sample here to show you. So on the top here, you can see the structure of last year's test. Obviously very familiar to many of you, multiple choice, short response, extended response. And this is for the grades 5 and 6 ELA. Math, I believe, also has a small shift as well. But you'll note that multiple choice questions are still part of it. But instead of short and extended response, there's going to be constructed response questions in 2- and 4-point flavors. And the order of questions as well is going to be a little bit shaken up as well. So I bring this up because, oh, I zoomed, I didn't have a slide there, okay. I bring this up because I don't want people to get too focused on the idea of, let's just keep things the same this year and we'll change things up next year, because unfortunately, there's going to be change in your 3-8 testing this year no matter what happens. The format of the test is changing. I can tell you answer sheets for paper-based testing for 3-8 ELA and math, answer sheets are probably going to look a little bit different because of this structural change as well. So if you're thinking about avoiding change this year, unfortunately, that's really not going to happen. So if you're, so that's really the point I wanted to make is unfortunately change is already here. You're not going to be able to hold it off for another year. Computer-based versus paper-based is certainly one of those decisions as well. Support information. So any questions you have, just please call us up. Here's our direct line to data readiness. Questar support is, of course, always available. I would say start with us. We can probably help direct you to the right resources if you can't find them, but we include Questar support information here as well, in part because, too, they have some very important support roles during the testing process, too, that often there are pieces that only they can do. If you have policy support questions, things like that, we can certainly try fielding those as well, but CBT support at NYSED.gov is certainly another avenue. Sometimes we direct you all that way if we're not able to answer a policy question. I've also put a link there to the NYSED CBT support website. I find NYSED has varying levels of support documentation for a lot of their services between the warehouse and testing and other things. The CBT support website that NYSED has is fairly good. It has a very nice search tool. If you're looking for something, putting it into that search box can often give you some materials. They're also very good about, if not some of those resources being updated yet, past resources can often help you answer questions or at least get an idea of what things look like in the past. So certainly a good resource there as well. We'll also be posting some additional CBT materials on our website this week. We have a few additional handouts we'll be posting to our web link under the first item as well, so keep an eye out for those too. I'm going to pause there and see what questions do we have. So I've tried to cover a lot of the baseline CBT stuff, but opening it up for any questions that you all might have. Where can we find the milestone information? So that will be posted along with the PowerPoint presentation. So you would probably get it out of there. We won't be posting that as a separate handout. I don't know if that's something that we would be updating throughout the year. We'll have to see how the timeline develops, but we will certainly share that out. Certainly any individual updates that happen to that we'll be sharing out, and Tuesday Tidbits is a usual avenue where we're going to share that information in terms of new due dates and new milestones and things like that. Other questions? Wow, I answered everything in a half hour, really? So everybody is now a CBT expert. Okay, maybe I'm going to go on vacation. Okay, well, so certainly if you have other questions that come up, if you're thinking through different scenarios in your building, please reach out. We're here to help. And again, December 9th is really where that decision happens. Oh, okay, we have another question coming in. Will simulations be only ELA? No, so the simulations, so you can only do the simulation for grade levels that are going to actually be doing the live testing. But my memory, at least of past years, and I can clarify this with SED, is you sort of pick the subject that you'd like to do a simulation with for your grade levels. So if you're planning on going operational with your grades 4 and 7 kids, if you want to do ELA with grade 4 and math with grade 7, regardless of what you're operationally doing with them. So if you're planning on going 4 and 7 ELA for the live test, you could do a simulation of grades 4 and 7 with math. So there's no requirement that your simulation be the same subject as your operational. You just can't do extra grade levels or different grade levels or things like that. Is there a place where all the accommodations that are available are listed? The CBT support website has some good information on accommodations. The handouts that we'll be posting on our website have at least some beginning pieces about accommodations, but that is a topic that often requires a lot further discussion, sometimes about the right way to configure things or how a student's individual testing accommodations might apply to what SED has identified. The test administration manual also has some more materials on that as well. So I would say look at what's out there on the CBT support website, look at the handouts we've got, and if you still have questions on that, just reach out. We can try and find the answer for you. We may have heard it before. It may not. It may be buried a little bit too in some cases. So, can you speak about the format changes? A little bit, yeah. So I mostly understand it from a tangential perspective because, you know, as I say to some people sometimes, I've never actually taken a 3 through 8 ELA or math test or a Regents test. I'm not from New York, so my relationship to the test is kind of indirect. But so my understanding is that there used to be essay questions and that there are more short response questions now instead. One side effect I am aware of is the test used to be 1 page, and the answer sheet, excuse me, and now it's going to a 2nd page. And we're still getting some more information about some of the actual changes in the answer sheet itself. One item I can tell you from an early draft I saw, and I don't know if this will actually be permanent, but just from a visual impact, I know that the answer sheets used to be printed in color, and I believe, at least the drafts I've seen, they're going to be in black and white now. So changes that maybe don't impact anything directly, but something that will actually be different this year. And we still haven't actually seen the final draft of what those answer sheets are going to look like, so that could change. But I do know, given the change in questions and just the change in how the test is configured itself, that those pieces are definitely going to look different somehow this year. Yeah, so the simulation being different from the sampler, that's a good question. So the biggest difference, I would say, is going to be your student login tickets. So as part of testing, either the simulation or the live testing, you're going to be printing off a login ticket for each student. It's going to have a username and a password for them. And we have recommendations on best practice for how to manage that. That's probably CBT 102 or CBT 201. But essentially for the simulation, each student is going to have a personalized, individualized login ticket for them. And that's going to be generated from Nextera Admin, so your staff are going to get an understanding of the process of, all right, I have my students in Nextera Admin, now I've printed login tickets, how do we distribute those to students? The biggest difference is with the question sampler, they're not individualized. You're going to see a username of ELA03. So you might hand out a similar or the same login ticket to an entire classroom, and they might all be using the same username and password for that question sampler. The simulation, you're going to have an individual login for each student, and sometimes even assigning an accommodation for them as well, which again can be done with the question sampler, but more generic logins in that case. Okay. Oh, we got a couple more questions, Bro, maybe? Yes, the official simulation is only available if you're doing what we call operational or actual computer-based testing, and only for the grades and buildings that have chosen to do that actual testing. Yep, that's correct. Okay, going once, going twice. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Please reach out if you have questions or concerns, and we will certainly have other materials available. We'll be sharing through Tuesday Tidbits. We're looking at the possibility of additional trainings as well. SED also quite often does what they call kind of a road show, where they try to come to multiple regions of the state. I think they try and come to 6 of the 12 RIC regions or 6 of the 12 regions as they identify them throughout the year. Oh, we have another question. When is the simulation scheduled to run? January 17th through the 27th is my memory from the timeline. You can check me on that once you get the PowerPoint. But obviously, you just run the simulation on 1 or 2 days during that period based on, you know, if you're going full CBT 3 through 8 in your entire district, you might take up multiple days of that window. But yeah, so you'll be able to pick your time frame during that. So we'll be seeing if SED is doing a training in our region. It's possible they would do one here. I know in the past, generally my memory from the past was they would either do a training in our region or potentially neighboring over in Syracuse. So if we have one local to our region, I'll certainly be sharing that information out to you all. And those trainings tend to take more the form of some of the more nuts and bolts of working with Nextera Admin, looking at things in greater detail. So some of this material, but a little more detailed and for people who are doing operational testing for sure. So, okay. Well, thank you all. Please send along any other questions you have, and have a good day.